Good morning, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. This is Massimo Leone, Director of the Center for Religious Studies of the Bruno Kessler Foundation. Today, we have another a seminar in our series, 2024 series of seminars on enchantment and disenchantment in religion and ethics. And we have the distinguished pleasure to have with us as a speaker Professor Volkhard Krech from the Ruhr University Bochum, on the Ruhr Bochum Universität. Professor Krech is a professor of the study of religion at the Ruhr University Bochum, Germany, and also director of the Center for Religious Studies, CERES, and spokesperson for the Collaborative Research Center's Metaphors of Religion. I must say that I've personally enjoyed working as a visiting professor at CERES. It's one of the most wonderful places in Europe to work about religion. It's a wonderfully interdisciplinary center. Professor Krech was also director of the Käthe Hamburger Center for Advanced Studies in the History of Religion between 2008 and 2019. And his research interests that are extraordinarily wide and deep at the same time include the evolution of religion, theory of the history of religion, religious pluralism and globalization, sacralization, religion and art, and a history of the study of religion. Those who know Professor Volker Krech know how busy he is. So, I really thank him very much for finding the time to visit us online for the moment, and I hope also physically very soon. And I give him the floor for this a seminar on what's left of secularization. Thank you, Volkhard.
Yeah, thank you, Massimo, for the invitation and the kind introduction. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, Massimo has invited me to talk about secularization from a sociological point of view. While the concept of secularization had become a familiar term in Western societies since the 1950s at the latest, secularization has been called into question by counter-concepts such as re-enchantment. Massimo mentioned the term, since the 1990s, also at the latest. However, the resurgence of religion means that religion once was less significant. In turn, more and less are units of comparison that require measurement criteria. On the other hand, however, it is difficult to measure religion. It cannot be reflected only in quantitative ratios. Religion, secularization, and re-enchantment are always also discursive concepts. With this in mind, I will nevertheless ask in the following what is left of secularization and try to give an answer from a sociological systematic perspective. My lecture first and very briefly discusses some aspects of the concept of secularization, and second, what can be meant by the distinction between religious and secular. Third, the talk proposes to apply the difference between micro, meso, and macro processes in the social domain in general and in the religious sphere in special. The talk then highlights some aspects of the current religious situation in Europe before I draw some conclusions. And please keep in mind that what I just hinted at, that numbers are metric means that we need in order to use sentences like religious war is not that much significant anymore or has become more significant in recent times. So we need numbers somehow to metrically compare, but numbers don't say all. Now, the concept of secularization. As we all know, secularization is a colorful term, to say the least. In its strongest version, the concept suggests nothing less than a unilinear, irresistible, and irreversible process of religion losing all its significance, from marginalization to more or less complete annihilation. To the best of my knowledge, no one holds this radical view anymore today. In a more moderate version, secularization does not mean the complete disappearance of religion, but its decline in terms of quantity and importance. This view proposes a metric, as I already hinted at, by which the proportions of more and less and a respective threshold between before and after or beyond can be measured or at least reliably be estimated. This can be quantitative in the sense of representativeness, but also qualitative in the sense of structure and typicality. Whatever the term secularization might mean, it denotes at least not a unilinear and irreversible process. Furthermore, it is not a development from the religious to the secular, as, for instance, Talat Assad, at least in parts, argues in his book on formations of the secular. Instead, religious and secular are two sides of a distinction, and the two sides need each other. This brings me to my second point, namely to the distinction between religious and secular. Whenever something is referred to as secular, it at least implicitly refers to the religious. For example, it only makes sense to speak of secular science, for example, the study of religion, secular law, secular politics, secular medicine, secular arts, and so on, if these societal domains are to be set in difference and thus also in relation to religion. Difference and relation are two sides of the same coin. Thus, the secular denotes either a religious perspective or a position that is related to religion. To my understanding, the distinction between the religious and the secular names the boundary between religion as a specific societal domain and other societal spheres, such as law, politics, economics, education, the health sector, and arts, and so on. Religion is not simply on one side of the distinction, but in turn, the distinction and relation between the religious and the secular constitutes the domain of religion. Other societal domains might refer to religion and, in turn, to themselves as secular. Thus, it cannot be the question whether, for example, Europe once has been religious, then became secular, and now perhaps is getting religious again. Instead, the question only can be whether religion, and thus the religious-secular distinction, is more or less important and influential compared regarding different historical circumstances. The religious-secular distinction is based on the assumption that religion is a differentiated and distinct area or domain of society alongside others. This assumption, in turn, requires the specification of a firmly defined concept of religion. My proposal in this respect is to understand religion as a social function, or better say a societal function, that deals with contingency that cannot be dealt with in other ways, in any other way by its own means. And religion's own means consist of semantics that are coded by means of the transcendent immanent distinction. Only these criteria together are sufficient to define and conceptualize religion. In semiotic terms, and Massimo knows it better, it is about the interplay between pragmatics, that means the function of religion, semantics, and syntax that determines the religious code, in the case of religion, the transcendent immanent distinction. The question of how significant and influential religion is also depends on the social level in relation to which the question is asked. This brings me to my third point, namely to the differentiation between different levels of the social, usually called micro, meso, and macro processes and structures. The micro level consists of single interactions. Religious interactions comprise, for instance, liturgical actions, processions, prayer, meditation, recitation, as well as single, this is important, single religious communication through mass media, such as writing and reading of religious text, watching religious actions via TV, and today using the internet and so on. The meso level consists of different kinds of more or less organized forms of sociality. These forms range from groups via movements and networks to formal organizations. Finally, the macro level consists of the society and the regulation of the relation between different societal domains. That is, in our case, the relation between religion and other societal domains. So, for example, the relation between religion and politics is analytically to be situated at the societal macro level. The three levels are not to be understood in isolation from each other, but overlap in various ways and intertwine without being merged. So it's important to analytically distinguish these three levels, but bear in mind that there are overlappings and intertwinings. Furthermore, the three levels are not in a relation of mere aggregation, but have an emergent state of their own. For example, formal organizations are not the sum of symbol interactions, but have an eigenstructure. This is a term established in German, Eigenstruktur, but also established in the Anglo-Saxon world. I propose to apply this distinction to the development of religion. We can then see that the relationship between the religious and the secular is different at the micro level with individual actions than on the meso level with social movements, networks, and organizations, and on the macro level of the relation between religion and other societal domains. Against the background of the distinction between micro, meso, and macro processes and structures, different figurations of the significance of religion and the religious secular distinction can be illuminated using the example of respective developments in German during the 20th and beginning of the 21st century. It's not necessary to refer to Germany, but I have data for this case. I think we can develop comparable analysis to other countries. But yeah, for now, the German example should hopefully be sufficient. Religious affiliation is usually taken as one important indicator for the significance of religious organizations, such as the two major Christian churches in Germany, the Protestant and the Roman Catholic Church. On this slide, you can see the affiliation to one of the two major Christian churches in West Germany between 1910 and 2022. I restrict myself to West Germany because the religious situation in the former GDR, as we all know, was subject to special political and legal conditions. So we get a different picture in this respect. While 98% of the West German population formerly belonged to one of the two major Christian churches in 1910, it is 48% in 2022. So almost half of, exactly half, more of half of around 1900. The figures clearly show the decline of formal church membership from the 1960s on. This is a well-known fact. Historians like Hugh MacLeod and others have extensively analyzed this development in Germany, but also at the European level in general. It has to do with, the 68 social cultural movement and so on. However, membership or exit might have various motives next to religious ones. Also, for instance, convention, tradition, or even monetary aspects. In addition, membership figures do not say anything about the significance and influence of an organization itself at, as I said, at an emergent level. So organizations and other social forms are not the mere aggregation of individual habits and actions. If we would rely only on membership affiliation, we would go on in telling the story according to the secularization concept mentioned earlier, so the pure decline. Let's have a look at religious interactions instead, for instance, at the participation in communion, and this would refer to the micro level of single interactions. When we look at respective figures, we recognize an increase in communication participation within the Protestant churches since the early 1970s, that is in parts even higher than around 1910. This is an indicator for the fact that although membership is declining, religious interactions framed in a formal religious organization can actually do in parts get intensified. In a further step, I would like to deal with the societal presence of religion beyond the personal and organizational dimension. I suggest taking the book production on secularization and on religious topics as an indicator for the significance of communication about religion at the societal macro level. When taking a closer look at the societal public sphere, it becomes quite clear that the notion of secularization is born from modern society. Many colleagues of Massimo and mine have extensively worked on the relation between modernity and religion, and we all know that modernity essentially identifies itself through the positive or negative relation to religion. Not only, but importantly. The public discussion concerning secularization itself has become an empirical fact. This transfer from the religious domain via the public to the social sciences, not only social and cultural sciences, led to a rapid increase in the production of books on secularization, as the statistics on this slide show. Even if one does not go deeper into the content of the books produced, the sheer number of books with the title on secularization, so secularization as a topic dealt with, can be used as an indicator of secularization becoming increasingly in demand over the course of the 20th century. And as I said in the beginning, regarding the distinction between the religious and the secular, secularization necessarily refers to the topic of religion. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to talk of secularization and of secular entities. After a slow start at the beginning of the 20th century, the curve rises rapidly from the 1950s until today. The responsibility for this development lies both with the proponents and with the critics of the idea of secularization. So secularization is a highly debated notion. The next slide shows the scientific and popular literature on religious topics in relation to total book production in Germany between 1991 and 2002. The green upper curve shows overall book production in Germany. Below, in red or purple, is the production of scholarly literature on religion, and the blue curve shows the number of popular, non-scholarly literature on religion. As you can see, while the production of scholarly books on religion remains roughly constant, the rate of increase of popular books on religious topics in proportion to general book production is considerably higher. If one interprets these facts as a growing interest in religious topics, one could easily argue that organized religion is evolving either into discursive religion or into what can be called vagabond or fuzzy religiosity. I now turn to some observations concerning the current religious situation in Europe. To the best of my knowledge, we don't have similar data available like I showed with respect to the German case at the European level. This is why it is hard to say anything about historical developments regarding the significance of religion at the European scale. Instead, I address some aspects of the current religious situation and please understand current situation in a broad sense. I don't have quite contemporary data. So nevertheless, at the religious situation during the last 10 years in Europe, according to the distinction between the micro, meso, and macro levels. The data of those persons who consider themselves as religious, as you can see on this slide, reflect the usual expectations. Among those countries that are dominated by Roman Catholicism, Poland and Italy have the highest percentage. With respect to Christian Orthodoxy, it is Ukraine, Serbia, Romania, Greece, and Georgia. Turkey and Azerbaijan, both dominated by Islam, also have a high percentage. Sweden, France, the UK, and Belarus have the lowest percentage of those who consider themselves as religious. Considering the distinction between the micro, meso, and macro levels, we might take the frequency of prayer outside worship services as an indicator for single religious actions at the micro level. It is again Poland, Italy, Ukraine, Romania, Greece, and in addition, Ireland that have high rates in this respect. The countries with the highest percentage of prayer outside religious services are Turkey and Azerbaijan, both dominated by Islam. However, the nation state might not be the only factor for the significance of religion in Europe. Most of our colleagues who work quantitatively on the religious situation rely on data that is ordered by nation state criteria. This is, I think, highly, well, at least problematic. The specific religious traditions to which people are affiliated are at least as important. And we don't have a nation-state situation in any country which is ruled only by one religion. We have an emerging religious diversity in all of the countries in question. According to the centrality scale developed by Stefan Huber, a professor of psychology of religion working in Switzerland, evangelicals or charismatics, respectively, and Muslims have the highest percentage of high religiosity in Europe, Protestants and Buddhists the lowest. Unfortunately, as far as I know, we don't have comparative data for the influence of religious organizations in Europe, so at the macro level. Thus, it is difficult to evaluate the significance of religion at the meso level compared to the micro level I just showed you an indicator of. Regarding the macro level, I suggest taking the Religious Regulation Index developed by the US-American scholar Jonathan Fox. The Religious Regulation Index considers various variables regarding the relation between religion on the one hand and politics as well as law on the other hand. So here we have the societal tasks to mediate between religion on the one hand and other societal domains, here in this case, politics and law on the other hand. The highest degree of religious regulation is to be found in Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Bulgaria, Turkey, and last but not least, Germany. Even though we don't have data to compare historical developments, the distinction between micro, meso, and macro levels doesn't show a clear picture. For example, the degree of political and legal regulation of religion in Europe does not necessarily correlate with the quantity or intensity of religious practices. However, the distinction between the micro, meso, and macro levels is needed to avoid wrong reductions and to understand partly contrary developments regarding the relation between the religious and the secular. I finish with some conclusions. First, the question of the significance of religion. I took Europe and some countries in it as an example. Needs comparison regarding the historical development and with synchronic and at the synchronical level between different religious situations, and last but not least, with respect to other world regions, like colleagues of mine in the Consortium on Multiple Secularities based in Leipzig, Germany, conduct research on. Secondly, from a systematic perspective, I suggest not to speak of either secularization or re-secularization or re-enchantment, but to look for different figurations of the distinction between the religious and the secular instead. It is the boundary work between the religious perspective and the secular, as well as the secular perspective on religion. These figurations include the following. Religious interactions might get intensified beyond mere quantitative representativeness, like, for example, organized religious rituals in particular, and the evangelical, charismatic, and Muslim milieu in general shows. In addition, the discursive presence of the boundary work between the religious and the secular has dramatically increased. However, the impacts on social structures at the meso level and the micro levels still have to be analyzed. As I hope to have shown, the processes at the three analytically differentiated levels don't match each other. Furthermore, the religious situation in Europe, as in other parts of the world, at the societal macro level, is largely determined by the function of religion as an identity marker. I said in the beginning to conceptualize, or I proposed to conceptualize the societal function of religion as coping with contingency that cannot be coped with other wise. And one of the ways to cope religiously with contingency is establishing a more or less controlled fixed identity. So religion more and more functions as an identity marker, overarching other identity markers such as the socio-economical status, gender, age, ethnic, and other cultural factors, and so on. So the religious identity marker since the 1990s, after the 1989 break, so to speak, gets more and more important. In the wake of the culturalization of religion, it is not so much religious practice itself that is present or even increasing, but the talk about religion as a demarcation marker in multicultural societies. Related thereto, religion functions as a specific kind of cultural memory, as Jan Assmann, Grace Davy, and Danielle Hervieux-Léger have argued. And last but not least, secularization beyond religion must also be considered. By this, I mean the process in which other societal domains than religion use religious elements to deal with contingency as the main religious function. So I propose to distinguish two concepts of secularization. One concept is the religiously internal secularization, and the other one is, so to speak, borrowing religious elements for dealing in other societal spheres such as politics, law, and so on. We can only understand art religion, for example, or political religion if we analytically distinguish between these two concepts of secularization. All in all, it's not only a question of more or less in quantity, but also of the intensity in which the boundary between religious and secular is drawn and at the same time contested. This intensity has a metric of its own beyond the mere aggregation of actions and habits of single persons. Yeah, by this I stop or make a comma, not a point. I thank you for your patience and interest, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, dear Volkhard. An online virtual applause to your, concise but extremely dense presentation with very interesting data and also, thought-provoking insights.